I want to say probably has a lot to do with
You
geography.
did that, but
All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Moscow Board of Adjustments for July 13th, 2023. The first order of business is approval of our minutes from July 5th, which I read through. It was a short meeting. It looked pretty succinct and correct. I didn't even find a scrivener. Anybody else have any comments?
Move to approve.
All right, I have a motion to approve. Do I hear a second?
second?
I have a motion. I have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Abstain.
And one abstention. So they are passed and approved. Our second order of business has to do with the public comment, which allows 15 minutes for anybody to discuss anything not on our agenda, but only seeing two people that are here for the agenda item.
I'm tempted to talk to you about parking, Joe.
You don't want to ask me about parking. I live across the street from a park. So that said, I think we'll go on to our conditional use application tonight.
Good evening, board members and chairman. So for your consideration tonight, we have a CUP amendment for a K through 8 charter school located at 406 Powers Avenue. Before we get into tonight's proposal, I'd like to give a little bit of background. In November of 2017, Palouse Prairie Charter School applied for a conditional use permit for a school located on the subject property. The applicant proposed to develop a K through 8 public charter school that was approximately 14,400 square feet in size, and it included a multi-purpose room, 9 classrooms, administration area, a temporary 1,792 square foot detached modular classroom, was for 220 students and 15 staff and teachers. The hours of operation were proposed from 8 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. Monday through Friday, and the school operates a traditional August through June schedule. The future school expansion was anticipated in the original proposal. On December 11th, 2017, the matter came before the Board of Adjustment. At that time, staff recommended approval with 2 conditions. The first was that the applicant dedicate the property and provide construction of a 96-foot diameter cul-de-sac to city standards at the current terminus of Powers Avenue prior to any building permits being issued upon the subject property. And the second condition was that the applicant shall install a type A landscape buffer along the property lines adjacent to the current farm ranch zoned property to the north and east and south of the subject property. After conducting the public hearing and due deliberation, the board voted to approve the application with 1 condition, and that was the construction of the roundabout. Construction of the school was complete in 2019 along with Power Avenue's cul-de-sac. This is the subject property as it sits today. As you can see, Palouse Prairie Charter School here outlined in turquoise. It is a 3.2 acre parcel with 380 feet of frontage along Nursery, and it's located at the terminus of Powers Avenue. There is multifamily housing to the west. There are single-family homes to the north along Southview Avenue and east along Sunny Court. And there's undeveloped farmland and land owned by Moscow Affordable Housing Trust to the south. Streets and access of the subject property are via Powers Avenue, which is the 96 diameter cul-de-sac with sidewalk, curb, and gutter that was required in the original conditional use permit. The subject property also has 380 feet of frontage along Nursery, which is currently developed to a 32-foot wide public street with curb, gutter, tree lawn, and a 5-foot sidewalk on both sides of the street. Additionally, there's a pedestrian pathway on the northeastern side that extends from Southview Avenue to the subject property. This is a view looking from the west side of the property at the terminus of the cul-de-sac, showing the current school and the modular building. This is the front of the subject property, and this is a view looking west from the east side of the subject property. Zoning of the subject property is in the Farm Ranch and Outdoor Recreational Zoning District. North of the property is R2 Moderate Density Residential Zoning District. To the south of the subject property is both Farm Ranch as well as R4 multifamily zoning. And west of the subject property is also multifamily. Setback requirements and height requirements are a 3-acre minimum lot size, 80 feet of frontage. The minimum setback for the front is 25 feet, 20 feet for the sides, and 30 feet in the rear, and the maximum building height is 35 feet. So that brings us to our current proposal. The applicant is proposing to amend the existing conditional use permit to include a phasing plan. In the first phase, there would be expansion of the multipurpose room, 24 feet to the east, resulting in an additional 1,800 square foot area. Included in that would be the addition of a mezzanine and the remodel of the multipurpose room. The second proposed phase is a 3,600 square foot addition to the west, which includes 4 classrooms and an outdoor covered area. Additionally, there is a proposed main canopy entrance addition on the south side of the building. Phase 1 will commence this year, and Phase 2 will commence in the future when funding becomes available. This is the proposed site plan. As you can see, the existing school and to the eastern portion, this is the addition to the multipurpose room. This would be the addition to the west side of the site, and this would be the expansion of the entryway canopy. This is the proposed interior floor plan, again, showing the expanded multipurpose room here on the east side. The additional classrooms here on the west with the proposed covered canopy and the addition at the entrance. Elevations of the subject property are to remain the same. The additions will be at the same elevation as the current building. Again, this is a conceptual concept or conceptual image of the entryway. As far as parking and loading at the school, on the original application, 15 off-street parking spaces were required. At the time, 1 space was required per staff member. Parking requirements have been updated within the zoning code since that time. So the current requirements is 2 spaces per classroom for elementary and middle schools. And the current proposal would require 21 parking spaces in total. The existing site includes 23 off-street parking spaces. There are existing 2 loading zones and an inner one-way travel lane for exiting vehicular traffic currently existing on the property. The one-way lane also doubles as a primary fire lane for fire trucks. Other considerations. If the subject property were located within the R1, R2, R3, or R4 zones, all principal uses other than dwellings are required to provide a type A landscape buffer along the property lines abutting any property classified as zoning districts SR, R1, R2, and R3. A type A landscape buffer is used to screen between 2 different zone densities, utilizing a combination of shrubs and trees, both evergreen and deciduous, to create a visual and auditory buffer. While the farm ranch zone does not require this provision, since the original approval of the conditional use permit, the remainder of the undeveloped property to the north and east has since been rezoned to R2 and currently developed into a residential subdivision. It would be staff's recommendation that the school be required to provide a type A landscape buffer to the residential development along adjacent properties currently designated R2. That would be the north and the eastern property lines. So staff's recommendation tonight would be for approval of the amendment to the existing conditional use permit for the K-12 charter school located at 406 Powers Avenue within the city of Moscow with the following condition: that the applicant shall install a type A landscape buffer along property lines adjacent to R2 zones currently north and east of the subject property. And then additionally, direct staff to prepare the relevant criteria and standards to review at an upcoming meeting. And I would be happy to take any questions the board might have.
I have a couple. One, I'm hoping is pretty straightforward. This isn't requiring a variance. And so I'm assuming, given the grades that change around the various corners of the building, that attaining not exceeding 35 feet and attaining a mezzanine isn't an issue?
No, the mezzanine will be inside the existing building, so the height is proposed to remain the same. It will just be built inside.
Okay. And then the other question has to do with the type A buffer and the fact that we didn't include that condition before. And if memory serves, the reason for not approving it as one of the conditions was more of a concern of safety of hiding a school behind a buffer and shorter kids that wouldn't be seen. So 2-part question. Is since we're separating it with the R2, which has since been developed on the north side, are there fence lines there? Is a landscape buffer even doing anything that a fence wouldn't? That's the first part. And then the second is, will you clarify for us what the type A buffer is and its
Absolutely.
density and height
For sure.
and those types of things?
So to address your first question, there are some fences along those residential homes. Not all of them have them. I do believe shown on the site plan, the school has a fence. I'm not sure if it's existing or if it's proposed. If you see to the north property line, there is a hatched line on the plans that does show a fence. Like I said, I'm not sure. Is it existing?
It's down right now because of our construction
Sure.
that's going on in the playground, but it's ready to be put back.
So there is an existing fence on site. The type A landscape buffer is a 12-foot wide buffer. It can be reduced to 10 if it's irrigated. What that consists of is 1 canopy tree, 4 understory trees, and 6 shrubs every 100 feet. And 50% of those plantings need to be evergreen. And so what that essentially does is just provides a little bit more auditory buffer for the privacy of those homeowners, as well as, maybe, sight, shade, those type of things.
Joe,
Marshall?
if I remember correct, when I made the motion the first time, we didn't include the landscape buffer because we didn't have anything that was developing out there yet. We didn't know what kind of buffer would be needed or why.
What we'd separate it from?
Right, because there was no homes or there wasn't anything built there yet. And so it was just vacant ground. So we didn't really know what we were going to buffer against.
Those are my questions. Any other questions for staff?
I got one.
Yes.
Amy, when you're going through your review there, something caught my attention, the hours of operation. And it said from, I think it was 8 a.m., 4 p.m. Does that allow for extracurricular stuff to happen if they want to beyond those hours?
I think that within a school, they could, that's standard operating hours for the school session, school day. They
Uh-huh.
probably do have after-school activities or functions that happen later in the evening.
So it doesn't restrict that?
No.
Okay, good.
That's the standard, just school day, I think, is what that speaks to.
Any other questions for staff?
I don't.
Thank you. With that, we would ask the applicant to come up and state your name and address into the mic and tell us about your application.
Hey, my name is Sarah Beggs. I'm the executive director at Police Perry Charter School. My home address,
Yes.
1530 Hatter Creek Road in Princeton.
Sure.
So we're applying for this. It was part of our phased plan. The main thing that we're asking for is that extra 24 feet of the multi-purpose room expansion. That is going to allow for more space for our students during PE, during the winter, as well as our lunch and nutrition. The mezzanine is going to add storage space as well as space for the PE teacher and music teacher to have their supplies. It's integral and important to our curriculum and where we are right now. So that's why we're asking for this expansion. It was not clarified in the first application that was brought. It wasn't specified enough, so that's why we're doing the amendment. As far as the buffering, our landscape committee is prepared to come up with buffering plants. We are very big on finding native plants to the area and making sure that we keep it that way. We've already been planting some. So I spoke with my landscape committee and they are prepared to look into that if that is something that is required as a condition.
Okay.
That's it.
Well, first, congratulations. Obviously, it's growing.
Yeah.
The only reason you're here is that you are growing, so congratulations there. Are there any questions for the applicant?
So, I guess I wasn't here when this first came up, but I'm hearing there wasn't any residential around then. Now there appears to be. And how are you getting along with the neighbors?
Fine. We haven't had any complaints to our office. We have had a lot of new neighbors, the new building around that area. If you've been up there, it's right there. But we have not had any complaints. Neighbors have been very cordial and nice to us.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a, in the application, it talks about 220 students that, now, how many students are there now? Is this new classroom on the west, is that going to increase the number of students?
No, so we're continuing to stay a K-8 school with one classroom per grade level. We had 213 students this previous year, and we're projected to have about the same. That fills our classes. K-8 would be the 220 if we had our full capacity for all of them. The expansion is going to take over those module buildings. So our middle school are in the module buildings. So we'd like to get rid of those and have permanent buildings for them to be a part of. And that would also expand our learning center for our inclusion students and special education.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We have one more individual in the audience. Would you like to come up and speak for this application? What's that? I wasn't even going to suggest that. Neutral, in favor of, anything you'd like to say, we're open to listen to.
Nils Peterson, Moscow Affordable Housing Trust, 510 West Palouse River Drive in Moscow. I'm the neighbor, and I'm here to talk about parking and traffic. Is there a way, Amy, that we could go back and get the site earlier? Okay. Okay. While she's doing that, Community Land Trust model creates affordability by the land trust retains the land and only sells the improvements. And so we deduct the value of the fee simple sale. We deduct the value of the land and keep that out of the transaction. And then we have a leasehold arrangement that keeps it out permanently. So Moscow Affordable Housing Trust will be the neighbor in perpetuity. And then there will be people who live in houses who are also neighbors in the future as it's built. You may have seen the black house on the edge of the hill.
Okay.
That was done by University of Idaho students last year. And they're doing the second, they are my contractor. I'm the evil developer and they are the contractor.
Do you want the site plan or the aerial?
I want to back up to see there we go. That's good. That's good.
You want
Yeah.
it bigger?
Oh, if it gets bigger, I was like big. Maybe there. Let's do that. So now do I get the pointer?
I want everything.
This one, this top line is going to be your dot, big purple button.
There we go. Big purple dot. So that chunk there, 17 lots.
Nels, you gotta go to the. Thank you.
Thank you. So that chunk there, 17 lots, is housing trust land. And then we also have a 3-lot parcel up here. We use the lot split rules. The lower one, obviously the immediate neighbor, I intentionally designed with those alleys so that the houses would be rear loaded because I knew there would be a morning rush and an afternoon rush of traffic, which indeed there is. And so by loading the alley for the parking for those houses, I've taken that pressure and conflict out of the scenario.
Which is the alley?
It's a upside down T shape.
Okay, got it.
So it's got a little piano curve and then goes straight and then it comes up to the cul-de-sac. Anyway, so intentionally, I designed in response to the school's presence to try to minimize that traffic and parking kind of conflict. The other thing that did was it kept curb cuts out of Powers Avenue, which leaves more parking along Powers Avenue for potentially for residents of the area I'm developing, but more often it's for school use kinds of parking. So now I'm done talking about parking and traffic. We're here tonight because I made a mistake. Back in the original CUP, when I was in that chair, we didn't include these expansion elements that you're considering tonight. Mea culpa. But you chose not to put those buffer requirements on at that time. They potentially would be a burden on the school, and parts of the way the playground now is designed and built were built in the presence of the current understanding of the conditions. So while I understand that Director Beggs is willing to work on that, I also would like you to think that maybe that 12 feet wide is a big strip to take out and commit to that landscape buffer around that whole perimeter. So that would be my thought. And had I not made the mistake and had these expansions in, we wouldn't be here tonight. Thank you.
Any questions?
I guess I'm not sure I fully understand. What do you regret didn't happen and how to remedy it now?
So what I regret is in the original CUP,
Yes.
we did not explicitly name these two things that or three little things that you're considering tonight. Had we named them clearly as future expansions, then they could have been done by right under the issued CUP. But having failed to do that explicitly, the school is forced to come back here to do it.
Because I thought I read that in the first CUP, you did anticipate that you were going to expand.
In a cloudy general
Okay,
way.
okay.
Right, and not in a way that was specific enough to.
Okay. So then what the staff is proposing is what you endorse? Is that what?
So
No.
the issue is last time you didn't impose a buffer,
Last time we
did not impose a
we did the
buffer.
cul-de-sac instead, yes.
Right, and now you're going to add, staff is suggesting that you add that back on
Right.
top.
Right.
And I'm going to argue no.
Okay.
I've got a question then.
Sure.
On the set of drawings that we were provided,
Fields.
there's I don't even know if it's up here. I didn't see it. Is the northeast corner
Yeah.
within what would be a buffer zone? Would it
Go ahead.
prevent them from,
Put it in.
Because this
From
is
the-
R2, it should.
There?
The northeast does have a 20-foot setback. So there's a 20-foot setback on the side and a 30-foot setback in the rear. So no building could be placed there anyway. A landscape buffer can go in that area.
okay, the print was so small that even with my glasses and my magnifying glass, I couldn't quite tell what that dimension was. I thought it was a setback. I just wanted
It
to
is.
clarify. Okay.
Though a challenge is there is a public right-of-way that comes from Southview down to the south, to the northeast corner, and then becomes a path inside the property that comes down to the school. And so that path lies significantly in the zone where the buffer would be, in that corner.
Okay. While you stay there, a question for Amy. Would that mean then that a portion of that path would have to become landscape buffer, or can it exist within?
It can exist within.
Okay.
Yeah, we can allow for a path to go through that. It would just be the same as like a regular walkway would or a sidewalk. And so it would just, there would be the buffer and then there'd be what, probably I would say maybe a 5-foot walkway. There'd be a
I
gap
think
with
that's
it,
what's built.
about a 5-foot walkway, and then the landscape buffer could pick back up once past the walkway.
And can you clarify one more time? Is it the perimeter around the whole thing? I didn't
No.
think all the
It
sides.
is only the north and the east. That property that subdevelopment was developed after the original conditional use permit
Right.
was applied for. And so with the new rezoning of R2, it used to be farm ranch as well. With the new rezoning of R2 and the development of that subdivision is why we carried over that recommendation.
Okay,
So it'd just be to the north and to the east.
Joe, can I ask a question?
sure.
I guess I got a two-part question, Amy. Number one, if a street separates the zoning districts, does that give them any credit for distance or something like that?
Yes, if a arterial street separates two different zones, a type A or a type B landscaper, type A landscape buffer would become a type B, or a type B would become a type C. So that's when an arterial separates those things. In this case, that wouldn't necessarily come into play because it's just directly adjacent.
But it has to be an arterial, it can't just be
Correct.
a residential
Yeah.
street. And I guess the second question I have, when they first developed the school, and there was nothing else out there, we suggested, or we did not add it as a condition that they have to do a landscape buffer. But now, a different zoning configuration comes in. Would it be the omnibus to have the school do the buffer, or for the residential developer to do the buffer?
That was my
Sure.
kind of question, was now that other people have built our 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm not sure exactly which ones those are, R2, correct?
Mhm.
But they weren't required to put a 10-foot buffer to separate their uses, their new use to that existing use. So I guess whose monkey is it to
Yeah.
provide the
Sure,
buffer,
sure.
I guess?
And I think looking back at the minutes from the previous hearing, again, I wasn't present, so I can't speak exactly to the context of the whole meeting, but looking back at the minutes from the previous meeting from 2017, it does indicate that the board had chose to not imply that buffer at that time because you weren't sure what that would be
Buffering
rezoned to,
against.
right? And so I think now there's a difference and we know what's there. With more development and extending further to the western side, which is closer to those residential homes, I think that does impact those homes greater than the homes may have an impact on the school. I think that the use of the school is more intense than just a single-family home would have an effect on a school.
Joe, I got another question.
Yes.
Well, Amy, I don't remember the buffering table, even though I was part of developing it. I don't remember back 40 years, but if a fence is installed, does that reduce the size of the landscape buffer?
No, there is a little bit of a provision within the landscaping section, but it has more to do with, haven't had to look at it in quite some time, so bear with me for a quick second. It has to do with berms. Let's see, fences and berms. If a fence provided to meet the requirement of a C buffer yard with solid, it needs to be solid, view obstructing and constructed of natural materials or masonry, and shall be at least 6 feet tall. So that would be to meet the standards of a C-type buffer. When it gets to a type A buffer, like we're talking about, the code says if a landscape berm of at least 3 feet in height is provided in a B buffer, then plantings provided for an A buffer yard level will satisfy the buffer requirements. And then additionally, if the landscape berm is at least 3 feet in height, it's provided a C buffer with no fence shall be required. So there's like some variations there, but ultimately I think in this situation, when a type A buffer is required, it doesn't really speak to if you put a fence in them, then it's going to be reduced at all.
But if they did a 3-foot berm, they could reduce it back to a B buffer then?
Landscape berm is at least 3 feet in height is provided in a B buffer yard.
So they have-
Plantings provided, no.
They have that option.
Yeah, well, if a B buffer were provided, then they could go to an A. But it doesn't have anything that says if an A buffer is provided, you can do something else, because the A buffer is the least restrictive,
Okay,
Um,
okay, got it.
or the least amount of plantings.
Okay, I was going backwards.
One more question for Amy. The canopy trees was the first one, and then the
Right.
shrubs and bushes, and canopy trees obviously would be a tall tree.
Mhm.
What was the height?
Understory. So it's actually at the time of planting. They need to be, and this is all kind of in the process of being reworked. So there's specific requirements of what the size needs to be at the time of planting. the canopy tree needs to be 1.5 calipers in width. I think the understory tree, let me find the exact dimensions. They all have different times, what they need to be at the time of planting. Upon maturity, there's no real specification in code how exactly tall that's going to be. So I don't know if that helps at all.
Joe?
Understory trees, it does say canopy trees 1.5, understory trees 4 feet in height, and then shrubs 15 inches, evergreens 12 inches, and evergreen trees 3 feet. So for the shrubs and trees, it does give a little bit more, but for a canopy tree, they just say the caliper of 1.5 at the time of planting.
So I was present at the last elementary school that we built in Moscow that was built along farm land at that point. That would be McDonald's School, which now has a buffer of 2 6-foot wide ponderosa pines, basically all the way around the residential sides of that school. Why are we saying it has to be type A? Could we just say, 10 feet? Is that what we're asking? The difference between a B and an A is 2 feet, right?
And so at 10, let's see, at type A is the 12 feet can be reduced to 10 with irrigation. In that, the plantings are 2 canopy, 4 understory, and 6 shrubs. In a type B, it is 14 feet wide, but the plantings are now 4 canopy trees, 6 understories, and 6 shrubs. So we're increasing the canopies as we go. The canopy trees. However, the type C buffer is a little bit different in that as well, where you're back down to 2. You're at a 16-foot wide buffer now, but you're down to 2 canopy trees, 3 understory trees, and 12 shrubs. So there's different variations within the type A, type B, and type C to allow for different types of buffering.
So I guess what I worry about is if you look at the buffer between the Darth Vader building and the American Legion cabin, which was originally done as junipers, arborvitae, which are now so thick you can't see either one. But we're talking about kids here. I mean, the fence should probably be the best alternative from the standpoint of being able to see children and see children walking away or going away in our current world. And I think if you have a fence, they're not going to go anywhere. And if they want trees or you want to put trees in there, let's add some trees to it. And to say that it needs to be a buffer, if I remember right, the Palouse Mall is a type A buffer, correct?
On which side?
On the highway side. That's an awful lot of vegetation.
I would think that it
There was
probably
no
is. It is pretty close
Buffering
to that.
requirement when the
Back
Palouse
then?
Mall was built back then.
Okay. Is
Before you
there,
were born.
nope, I was here. Where is a mature type A buffer right now in town?
Mature type A buffer. I haven't been with the city long enough to see a buffer go from planting all the way to mature, and I haven't lived in Moscow that long, so it's hard for me to pick those out. I will say that along, say, the new police department along the highway on that side, there's a type A landscape buffer. Anything where you can think of an adjacent building that's been built with a different, say, commercial to residential, but those will typically all have type A buffers.
What kind of buffer do we have? I mean, we didn't have buffer requirements, but what about the duplexes? I'm going to look at the exact same thing here because
Sure.
you're probably going to have duplexes.
So
The duplexes next to West Park. What do we have between West Park and those duplexes? I think we have a row of trees.
there could be. So, and I don't know which duplexes you're talking about, West Park, but
The ones on Third Street. As you go down Third Street where it narrows down so you can't go across the creek,
okay.
there's a row of townhouses. They're double townhouses all the way down. I believe that's all R2. All we have is a row of arborvitae between those and another school. So, and based on what Nils is saying, I have to agree that having a huge amount dedicated to agriculture that's going to do nothing but look pretty and suck up water may not be the best use of resources.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time visualizing which duplexes those are, so it's hard for me to, yeah.
They're the rock ones. They've got the rock sides. Yeah, isn't that what I said? Lena Whitmore? Oh, sorry, that's the other side.
Okay,
Go to Lena Whitmore.
okay. Got it, yes.
And West Park used to have arborvitae between them and the apartments that were across the street.
Sure.
But again, Jerry, it was before the
I know.
buffering standards were
I
in
know.
place.
But you're coming here to ask for a variance from code. This is where a creative solution could be given without having to stay with what the code says.
Water was on my mind as well, but while we're all sitting discussing it and Nils is standing,
Sorry,
does anybody
Nils.
else have more questions? We can have you sit now if you would like.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Joe, I'll start.
All right,
All
let's,
right. I'd move approval of the conditional use permit with the inclusion of the staff recommendation to install an A-type landscape buffer adjacent to the R2 zoning district. And also request staff to prepare a reasoned statement of relevant criteria and findings. Now, my reason for including the A-type buffer, we didn't do it last time, Nels, and we didn't know what was going to develop around the school. Now we know. Okay. Had we known back then, we probably would have included it. And I don't know that we really have the authority to try and change the buffer requirement as to, well, instead, we're not going to make it 10 feet, we're not going to make it 12, we're going to make it 5 feet. I don't know that we really have the authority to do that. I'd say it's either in or it's out. And I believe now that we know what's there, that we should include it as staff recommendations.
I second.
I have a motion, I have a second. Before we vote, do either of you have any further comments? Jerry and Steve?
I made my pitch.
Well, I guess I have, as Jerry was saying, there's other areas around town where you can visualize or see that this, that there are variances. There are a lot of choices of that have been made over the years with this buffer area. But like Marshall says, I was here too last time that this was proposed, and the reason we didn't do the buffer was because we had no idea what was going to be out there, and so we even though it was recommended at the time, we chose not to impose upon them. But now we know what's there, and so I think we need to follow the recommendation of the city and the requirements of what is required for an R2 zone next to it. So I think that we don't have a lot of choice.
Before I call a vote, I'll throw in my 2 cents. One, my concern about the buffer the first time was safety and line of sight, and that's not the issue. We're not talking about a buffer on what would be the north side of Powers or the south side of the school, because that's clearly where all of the vehicular access occurs. The other thing I would say, kind of in response to my question about whose monkey is it to pay for the buffer now after the fact, and about the only analogy that I can think of is if I own a home in town that doesn't have a sidewalk out front, and there are several, I don't have to put a sidewalk there until I do something to my house that requires a permit, and now all of a sudden I have to meet current code. So I have to agree with you there. It's not our battle, I don't think. If there weren't sidewalks out there and there needed to be, this would have required them to do that. That's not the issue, it's the buffer. So with those 2 things said, I'll call a vote. We'll start with Tim.
Aye.
Steve?
Aye.
Marshall?
Aye.
Jerry?
Aye.
And I say aye as well. So it's unanimous. has written or proposed. All right. That said, do we have any new announcements? I know we have a meeting next week to review the minutes for this, and that is Wednesday, is that right? Wednesday at 5:30? Where? Here? Okay.
And then I think we have another meeting scheduled for August 3rd. Another hearing scheduled for August 3rd with the
Okay.
RCS meeting to follow at a later date.
Okay. All right.
I move we adjourn.
I have a motion.
Second.
I have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Good night.
Jennifer, did I tell you that I can't be here on the 19th?